Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the official party. Mr. David Mills, Korean War veteran. Mr. James Ferris, President of the Korean War Veterans Association. Mr. Ron Rosser, Medal of Honor recipient. Mr. Rodolfo Hernandez, Medal of Honor recipient. Admiral James A. Winnefeld, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Honorable Park Sung-chun, Korean Minister of Veterans and Patriots Affairs. The Honorable Eric Shinseki, Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Ambassador Choi Young-jin, Korean Ambassador to the United States. And the Honorable Leon Pannetta, Secretary of Defense. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel David Clark, Director, Department of Defense, 60th Anniversary of the Korean War Commemoration Committee.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Secretary of Defense and the Department of Defense's 60th Anniversary of the Korean War Commemoration Committee, welcome to this morning's ceremony commemorating the signing of the Armistice on July 27, 1953. Please stand for the national anthems of the Republic of Korea and the United States of America and the invocation.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chaplain Michael Brainerd, Joint Forces Headquarters, Military District of Washington, Chaplain.
Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, we give you thanks for this nation's freedom and for those individuals throughout history who have lived and died for our independence. We especially give thanks today for our veterans, those men and women who heeded the call of service, and that service took them to a faraway land on the Korean Peninsula. We thank you for their willingness to fight aggression so that we can stand here today on this sacred ground with our friends and allies, a people who are truly free. Our holy God, we, your people, give you thanks for the gift of peace that often comes from long struggles that try men's souls, the kind of peace that is bound and fraught from the blood of our heroes, brave men and women who answered the call to stand for freedom. Today we thank you for peace through the armistice bringing to a close the Korean War 59 years ago, a war that cost the lives of tens of thousands of Koreans, as well as over 50,000 Americans, young men and women who witnessed the crucible of war and failed to come home. Now let us celebrate this peace they helped to ensure and long for an everlasting peace that can come from only you, O God. We, your people, give you thanks. Amen.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, representing the Korean War Veterans Association and Korean War veterans around the world, it is Mr. Jim Ferris, a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a charter member of the KWVA.
Secretary of Defense Pannetta, other distinguished guests, fellow Korean War veterans, I am truly honored to represent the membership of the Korean War Veterans Association and their families. I want to especially recognize those who paid the supreme sacrifice during the Korean War, those who were wounded or are missing in action. Mr. Secretary, on a peaceful Sunday morning on 25 June 1950, the might of North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union, invaded a peaceful South Korea, crushing everything and everyone in its path. This is a well-known historical fact. What most Americans don't know is that on 5 July, 10 days after the war started, 19-year-old Private Kenneth Shedrick was killed in action. A member of the 21st Infantry Regiment of the 24th Infantry Division. Private Shedrick was the first American serviceman killed in the war. At that time, it wasn't even called a war. It was a United Nations police action. In his great new book, Those Who Have Borne the Battle, historian, former Dartmouth president, and Marine veteran James Wright quotes war correspondent Maggie Higgins, who was in the aid station when the body of Private Shedrick was brought in, that he had a look of surprise on his face. She goes on to say that the prospect of death had probably seemed as unreal to Private Shedrick as the entire war still seems to me. Now, we can debate the merits of the war, but we can never debate the fact that Private Shedrick was killed defending a country that he never knew. and the people that he had never met. On 27 July 1953, most of the guns fell silent, and an uneasy armistice was signed. Now, 59 years later, we stand in this hallowed amphitheater to pay tribute to all the private Shadricks who were killed, maimed, or who are still missing in action from the Korean War. But that's what we do. We honor the fallen, we comfort their families, we respect those that served, and remember, that Private Shadrick did not die in vain. God bless you all, and thank you for allowing me to be here this morning.
Private David Mills, U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division, was captured at the Battle of Outpost Harry just weeks before the armistice was signed at Panmunjom. Today, he represents those POWs who returned home and gives voice to those who perished in captivity.
"59 years ago today, the sun came up over the mountains at the east end of a valley in North Korea, where I was being held as an American prisoner of war, as it had the day before and the day before that. My outlook for the day was no different than it had been for any other day in the prison camp. Just try to make it through, alive, without being hurt, with the hope and expectation that it would be one day closer to freedom and going home. There was nothing out of the ordinary anticipated that day, as far as I knew, or anyone else knew among us prisoners. The prison camp routine went on as it always had. The camp guards and staff acted the way they always did. Our planes flew overhead all day long, as they did every day, on their mission from bases in the south to targets farther north. There was no announcement made or notice posted that a ceasefire would go into effect at 2200 hours throughout the Korean Peninsula, stopping the fighting that had gone on for over 3 years, and literally affecting the lives of millions of people in Korea and around the world. The truce negotiations had been going on for some time, and there were rumors about how they were proceeding, some hopeful and some not so hopeful, but no official information. And that wasn't all we didn't know. We didn't know that our names had not been turned over to the proper authorities for notification to our families that we were alive and being held as prisoners of war. Our military units even held memorial services for some of us, thinking we were dead. And this news was reported back home. However, after several days without seeing American planes in the sky, and with the camp guards acting friendlier, we presumed something had happened, but we did not know what. Maybe the war was over. Maybe a ceasefire had been worked out, but then again, maybe not. And if it had been, was it temporary or the real thing? Uncertainty prevailed. Camp conditions began to improve, but it was several weeks before we were officially notified that an armistice had been agreed to and was in effect, and that we would soon be transported for repatriation. On the happiest day of my young 17-year-old life, I was returned to American control through Freedom Village on August 24th, 1953. There are no words to describe adequately the joy, the thrill, the relief, the humbleness I felt at being free again. But a heavy price had been paid to maintain the freedom of this distant, peace-loving nation, which is today not only alive, but vibrant, healthy, and prosperous. Americans know so well that freedom is not free. It has always been thus in the American experience. Since the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775, more than 1 million servicemen and women have voluntarily placed themselves upon the altar of liberty, laying down their lives for the cause of freedom, not just for this great country, but for other nations as well. Thousands of brave and gallant Americans died defending the Republic of Korea for no other reason than to preserve its freedom. Thousands more were wounded, and thousands are still missing. The Korean War was a bloody, savage, and brutally fought war. No one who was there would say otherwise. It is sometimes referred to as the Forgotten War, and in terms of its historical significance, it is often overlooked. However, you men, you know what you did. You know how difficult it was. You and your families know the sacrifices you made and are still making. You are the greatest men I know. There is not a day of my life that I do not think about Korea, and thank God for His mercy and for all of you for bringing me back home again. For no greater love hath any man than he laid down his life for his friend. And my brethren, this morning, from the bottom of my heart, I thank all of you for my freedom and for the freedom of all former prisoners of war. May God bless all of you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we pause to remember the more than 54,000 American servicemen who lost their lives during the 3 years of the Korean War. They did not survive to grow old as we that are left have grown old. And on this morning, we remember them.
Ladies and gentlemen, flying in from the right side of the stage is your United States Air Force Heritage Flight in diamond formation. The team consists of a P-51 Mustang, an F-4 Phantom, an A-10 Warthog, and an F-16 Fighting Falcon. This flight honors all aircrew, maintainers, and ground personnel from all the departments. The Korean War marked the first use of jet aircraft in combat, ushering in a new era of air-to-air combat for the next 60 years. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Choi Young-jin.
Secretary Pannetta, Secretary Sensiki, Minister Park Seung-chun, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We are gathered here today to commemorate the ceasefire of the Korean War. 62 years ago, a terrible war broke out on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea, massively assisted by the Soviet Union, launched a surprise attack on the South, threatening the very survival of South Korea. 21 countries around the world came to our rescue. The war lasted more than 3 years with the involvement of China, claiming millions of lives, including hundreds of thousands of service members. The United States made the greatest contribution and sacrifice to defend South Korea from the communist attack. More than 1.7 million American service members participated in the Korean War, among whom around 37,000 people lost their lives. As the war ended with the status quo antebellum, and as the Korean War was the first in which the United States did not achieve total victory for a certain period after the war, it was described as a forgotten war. About 2 generations after the Korean War, however, we realized that Korean War has been one of the most rewarding and successful enterprises that the United States has ever engaged in. The Korean people have not forgotten and never will forget the sacrifices that were made for their freedom by our American friends. It is evident today that transcending the national interest, we fought for shared values. Rising from the ashes of war, Korea, thanks to your friendship and assistance, stands tall today as one of the shining examples of freedom, democracy, and the free market in the world. Along the way, Korean people have learned that democracy and free market go hand in hand, like two sides of the same coin, of which the indispensable ingredient is freedom, guaranteeing individual initiative. We are witnessing, without our fully taking account of it, a historic paradigm shift from raid to trade. Within the millennia-old paradigm of raid and warfare, tribes and nations favored raid, plundering, conquest, and colonization. Those days are over now. Within the new paradigm of trade, nations favor mutual prosperity based on trade and interdependence. The new paradigm of trade demands nations share the values of democracy and free market economy to flourish. Otherwise, nations working against it will suffer from poverty, isolation, and ultimate demise. As we commemorate the 59th anniversary of ceasefire of the Korean War, Korea is ready to pay back the assistance and sacrifice it received from many countries, especially from the United States, during the Korean War. We will do so by sharing and spreading these values with the people in East Asia and beyond. We remain convinced that promoting the shared values of democracy and market economy is the best way to ensuring peace and prosperity among nations. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral James Sandy Winnefeld, the 9th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Secretary Pannetta and Secretary Shinseki, Minister Park, Ambassador Choi, kamsamnida for being here today. Medal of Honor recipients, veterans of the Korean War, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, what a beautiful morning. Good morning to you. It's said that the alliance between the United States and the Republic of Korea was built on blood and sacrifice. And today, I'm so honored to speak among many of those who shed that blood and made those sacrifices that built this great alliance. Indeed, on this anniversary of the Korean War armistice, we honor the legacy of the hundreds of thousands of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, including those whom we lost, and those who are still missing, and those who came home and are here today, whose efforts along the 38th parallel and throughout the Korean Peninsula 6 decades ago helped prevent the spread of tyranny. A special greeting to the Korean War veterans who are present today at this very special event. Because of your service and sacrifice, the Republic of Korea exists today as a peaceful and prosperous country, a beacon of freedom in Northeast Asia, and a close ally of the United States of America. Your legacy, one of tenacity and perseverance in the face of the toughest of combat conditions, lives on. For many of us, that legacy is a family affair, that of a parent, a brother, or a close relative who served on the peninsula. And I'm no exception. My own father, as a young Navy ensign, got on a motor whaleboat, drove around a point, out of sight, behind enemy lines, and went ashore under fire to spot naval gunfire. So I know that I join a lot of children, fellow sons and daughters, and even grandsons and daughters who are in the audience today when I say that I am very proud of my father's service in Korea. And I might add for my Korean friends here today that my father is to this day a proud member of the Republic of Korea's own Korean War Veterans Association. And many of my dad's classmates and friends were Marines who endured the bitter cold and sweltering hot summers and long marches, and who, like many others from other services and many other countries, fought so heroically in Korea. Many of them never came home. And many Americans, with no personal connection to this struggle, have walked around the spine-tingling Korean War Memorial down there on the Mall and felt the presence of the 50,000 Americans who gave the last full measure of devotion in this cause. Their legacy lives on, where today the men and women of United States Forces Korea exemplify the teamwork and dedication set forth by their predecessors. Along with their Korean partners and other allies from around the globe, they maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. And to you Korean War veterans, I will tell you that your legacy is well tended by the men and women who have followed in your footsteps. Today they are stationed at Yongsan Garrison, at Camp Humphreys, at Osan Air Base, and elsewhere across Korea, fully committed to our long-standing partnership and serving in the long shadow of their predecessors. Their motto is Kachi Kapshida, we go together. For every warrior who served, there's a precious set of memories, and I'm so personally grateful to those who gave of their time and their resources to organize and participate in this important event, inspiring us all to recommit ourselves and to ensure that those who served in this so-called forgotten war are never forgotten. Today, I also have the great privilege of welcoming our keynote speaker to this podium. A veteran himself, a tremendous patriot, and dedicated public servant, he is a tireless advocate for our service members, our military families, and our veterans. I count myself lucky to serve with and for him, ladies and gentlemen, our Secretary of Defense, the Honorable Leon Pannetta.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Admiral Winnefeld, for that very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dignitaries from the Korean government, government officials, America's veterans. It is a real honor for me to be here with all of you as we commemorate America's participation in the Korean War, and we honor our veterans who served in that war, many of whom are with us today. This is an opportunity to remember and to pay tribute to the 54,246 U.S. service members who lost their lives in the Korean War. It's also an opportunity to celebrate the heroism, the sacrifices, the sheer grit, the determination, and the bravery of thousands of Americans who fought in the Korean War. It's a chance to thank them, to thank you for your service, for shipping off to a distant land, to fight in a noble cause, to put your lives on the line for this country, and to make the world a safer place. I distinctly remember more than 60 years ago, as a young boy, Carmel Valley, California, listening to the news as it came across the radio that the United States was entering the war in Korea. And I can remember the concern of my immigrant parents who had lived through World War II, that the United States was possibly entering another world war.
And I can remember later serving in the Army in the 60s and serving with many of those who fought so bravely in Korea. For 3 long, bloody years, American troops fought and they died in difficult conditions where the country's mountainous terrain and the unrelenting cold of winter were bitter enemies in themselves. As one veteran put it, on the other side of every mountain was another mountain. At times, the winter cold was so cold that it froze the oil in GI's weapons, so they couldn't fire, and thousands suffered from crippling frostbite. Former Secretary of State Dean Acheson would later say, "If the best minds in the world had set out to find us the worst possible location to fight this damnable war, politically and militarily, the unanimous choice would have been Korea." It was an uncompromising war, where capture by a vicious enemy often meant summary execution. In Korea, American troops and their allies were always outnumbered by the enemy, awaiting the chilling sound of the bugle and horns that would signal another human wave attack. Those who were there will never forget the tough, the brutal battles fought in Korea's mountains, at Massacre Valley and Bloody Ridge, at Chosin Reservoir and Pork Chop Hill. Battles that have become synonymous with the heroic sacrifice and the grim determination of the American fighting man. The Korean War caught America unprepared. The mighty military machine that had liberated Europe, conquered the Japanese Empire, had been rapidly demobilized. And only a few years of serious cuts and underinvestment had left us with a hollow force. The American soldiers, the Marines initially sent to Korea, were poorly equipped, without winter clothing, without sleeping bags, with insufficient ammunition, inadequate weapons, including bazookas that weren't strong enough to stop a North Korean tank. But those green troops sent to stem the communist onslaught were soon turned away and fought bravely because they became savvy combat veterans. What those young servicemen were taught before they faced the baptism of fire, they quickly learned in the unforgiving battlefield. They learned the battle know-how a soldier picks up as he survives fight after fight, battle after battle. What one war correspondent called the simple things the training books have always taught. No soldier ever learns until he's been shot at. Lessons such as keep off the skyline, dig in deep, keep your socks dry, keep your weapons clean, hold your fire until the enemy is close enough to kill. Those GIs became a battle-hardened force that fought from one end of Korea to the other, halting repeated drives to capture the entire peninsula, and in the process inflicted massive casualties on their enemies. As we honor our Korean War veterans, we must also remember the more than 7,900 Americans missing in action. I want you to know that the Department of Defense is dedicated to the search to identify and locate the remains of our fallen service members missing in action in Korea. We leave no one behind. And let me assure you that this sacred mission of going after those who were lost in battle will continue until all of our troops are accounted for. The Korean War, as others have said, is regarded as America's forgotten war. But that simply is not the case. Today, thanks to the service and sacrifice of our veterans 6 decades ago, South Korea has grown strong and independent. South Korea is a trusted ally, an economic power, a democracy, a provider of security in the Asia-Pacific region and other parts of the world. To the veterans of this war, your sacrifice made a difference. Contrast that progress with the bleakness of North Korea, which remains a dangerous and destabilizing country that is bent on provocation and is pursuing an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction while its people are left to starve. As we honor the service and the sacrifices of America's Korean War veterans, I believe it's important that we remember a crucial lesson from this war. Too many American troops paid a heavy price in Korea because they were not provided with the necessary training and the right weapons. They were sent into a tough fight with little preparation. Only a few short years after World War II, dramatic cuts to the force made us lose our edge, even though the world remained a dangerous place. That is a mistake we will not make again. And that's why today, coming out of a decade of war, we have put forward a strategy-driven defense budget to meet the challenges of the future. The world remains a dangerous place, and America must maintain the decisive military edge. We must remain the most powerful military power on the face of the earth. With this strategy, we will not only have the strongest military, but make no mistake, we will be ready to deter aggression anytime, any place, anywhere. Another lesson is the contributions that a generation that bled on the battlefield can make back here at home. Earlier we heard from Korean War vet David Mills. What an impressive story. In April, 17-year-old Private Mills, one of the lone holdouts against an attack that all but wiped out his entire company. He was wounded 9 times and finally captured. He was repatriated 4 months later. After he left the Army, he went on to graduate from Wharton School with an MBA and became a successful manager of medical centers in New York and Florida and Pennsylvania. Some 60 years ago, a generation of Americans stepped forward to serve in Korea, to defend those in need of protection and to safeguard this great country. America is indebted to you for your service and for your sacrifice. 60 years ago, the bugle sounded, and you responded. You are America's patriots, and America will never forget you. After 9/11, the bugle sounded again, and another generation stepped forward to fight, and yes, to die, to lead, and their strength and their dedication made very clear that no enemy attacks America and gets away with it. And they are the hope of the future. Over the past decades of war, this new generation, like yours, has done all this country asked them to do and more. They take their place alongside all of you, another greatest generation of heroes and patriots that exemplifies the very best America has to offer. Our nation is great because generation after generation after generation, when the bugle sounded, our warriors responded to fight and, yes, to die so that our children could have a better life. As we commemorate this war, let us always remember that sacred call to duty and renew our commitment to honor and to never forget those who have fought, those who have bled, and those who have died to protect our freedoms and our way of life. God bless you, and God bless the memory of all who have fought and died in Korea and on distant shores to defend the United States of America. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the benediction and remain standing for the departure of the official party.
Let us pray. Lord, continue to endow all our leaders with energy and insight, and send us on our way with strength for the journey that lay ahead. Moreover, Lord, continue to bless our nation, our friends, and the flag we serve. Now may the Spirit of God be near you to defend you, within you to refresh you, around you to preserve you, before you to guide you, behind you to justify you, and above you to bless you forevermore. Go in peace as brothers and sisters. Amen.
The mighty ocean deep. us when we cry to thee. For those in peril of the sea.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's observance of the 59th anniversary of the signing of the Armistice. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the remainder of your day.